Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on something that is truly at the heart of how modern websites and apps work, the JavaScript object. Now, it might sound a little technical, but trust me, by the end of this, you'll see it's a really simple but powerful idea that just unlocks a whole new way of thinking about code. So let's just start with a simple question. Think about a real-world thing, like a car. It has a brand, a model, a year, all these different pieces of information. So how in our code do we keep all those things tied together? How do you make sure the brand Toyota always stays with the model Fortuner? Well, that's the exact puzzle we're going to solve today.
And here's our game plan. First, we'll nail down what an object actually is. Then, we're going to crack one open and see what it's made of. After that, we'll get hands-on, learning how to work with its data, see how they're built, and finally, we'll put it all together to see them in action. Let's dive in.
Okay, first things first, what is an object? Let's forget all the jargon for a second. At its absolute core, an object is just a container. Yeah, that's it. It's a box we can use in our code to hold a bunch of related information all in one tidy place. So imagine for a second you're trying to describe a person in your code, but without using objects. You'd probably end up with a bunch of separate, totally disconnected variables like these. One for the name, another for the age, another for the city. I mean, it kind of works, but everything is just floating around. It's messy, and it is super easy to lose track of what belongs to who. And this is where objects just come in and save the day. See, instead of all those loose variables, an object acts like a digital file folder. We create one single person object, and then inside that neat little package, we store the name, the age, and the city. It's all self-contained and organized. So much cleaner, right? So if we had to get all textbook about it, this is the official definition. A JavaScript object is a collection of key value pairs. Just think of it like a list of labels and the data that goes with them. It's how we represent pretty much any real-world thing inside of our programs. Okay, so we know an object is a container. Now, let's look inside that container and really understand its basic building blocks, the anatomy of an object. The structure is surprisingly simple. Everything inside an object is called a property, and every single property has two parts: a key, which is kind of like a label you'd put on a folder, and a value, which is the actual information inside. So right here, name is the key and Marco is the value, and together that key and value make one single property. Let's break down the core rules here. Objects store data in those key value pairs we just talked about. The keys are basically always just text labels, or what we call strings. But the values, that's where the magic is. A value can be anything: text, a number, a whole list, even another object. And maybe most importantly, they're dynamic. You can add new properties or get rid of old ones on the fly, whenever you need to. Knowing what an object is made of is great, but how do we actually use it? That brings us to our next section, working with properties, how we get in there and access and manage all the data we've stored inside. So there are two main ways to get data out of an object. The one you'll see most often is dot notation. If you have a person object, you just write person.name. Simple, clean, easy to read. But sometimes you need a little more flexibility, and that's where bracket notation comes in. It lets you use a variable to tell the program which property you want, which is incredibly powerful when you don't know the exact property name ahead of time. And hey, remember when we said objects were dynamic? This is exactly what we meant. Managing their data is just so simple. Want to add a new piece of information like the city? Just define it. Need to update an existing value, like changing an age from 20 to 21? Just assign a new one. And if you need to remove a property completely, you just use the delete keyword. It's that flexible. So we know how to work with objects, but how do we build them in the first place? Let's take a look at the different blueprints we can use to create them from scratch.
All right, the first method, and honestly the one you're going to use like 99% of the time, is called the object literal. You just use a pair of curly braces, curly bracey, to create your object. It's direct, it's fast, and it is the standard you will see in the vast majority of professional projects. This is your bread and butter for sure.
Now, while that literal method is king, it's good to know there are other ways. You can use things like constructors or classes when you need to create lots of similar objects, kind of like a factory stamping out products. But for now, just remember this. Those simple curly braces of the object literal will be your go-to method almost every single time.
All right, it's time for our final section where we put it all together. Objects in action. Now that we've got the fundamentals down pat, let's explore some of the more powerful things that objects can really do.
So here's a really cool trick. An object's value can actually be a function. And when we do this, it gets a special name, a method. This is how we give our objects behavior. So our person object doesn't just store data about Marco anymore, it can now perform an action, like greeting us. It literally brings our data to life.
Objects can also be nested, kind of like those Russian dolls where one is inside another. Our student object has a property called address, and the value of that address property is another object with its own property for the city. This lets us build these incredibly organized, complex data structures that really mirror the real world.
Okay, so you've built this awesome object. What if you need to inspect it or do something with every single piece of data inside? Well, you can loop through it. The for in loop is designed for exactly this purpose. It goes through every property in an object, one by one, letting you work with each key. And here's what you get. For each property inside our person object, the loop lets us grab the key and its matching value. This is super useful when you need to display or process all the data that an object is holding. So when you boil it all down, objects aren't just some technical feature. They're a way of thinking. They give us the power to model the real world. People, products, events, literally anything, right inside our code. They organize complexity into simple, logical units. So the only question left is, what will you model next?